Hi again, everybody. Jeremy Plonk with First Bet and Express Bet, welcoming you to the It's Official podcast. We take on 5 hot topics in horse racing each and every Tuesday, and this week it's all about Preakness number 150. We'll tackle 5 topics about the Preakness and get you all set for racing's middle jewel in the Triple Crown. The Preakness is a race near and dear to me. I grew up right on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. Our TV stations were all the Baltimore markets. We were ACC country where we lived, and the Preakness has been part of my youth growing up. I remember back to 1980 and Codex and Genuine Risk, and my mom screaming at Angel Cordero aboard Codex for drifting the filly Genuine Risk wide on the turn in one of the more controversial, memorable runnings of the Preakness, and one certainly that my family remembers going back several decades now. We are going to discuss the Preakness in every detail that we can, so let's get started with our first of 5 hot topics. And before we do so, I want to welcome those of you tuning in through the portal at the First Preakness Wager Guide. First Preakness Wager Guide is up and running with stats, trends, information, and handicapping knowledge for you from the first family of handicappers towards Saturday's big day at Pimlico and also Friday's big card for the Black-Eyed Susan. All right, let's get going. Onto the big board we go for our first of 5 topics this week on It's Official. Preakness Posts and Pace. Field of 9 was drawn Monday night in a ceremony in Charm City, Baltimore, Maryland, for the Preakness Stakes. The 9 who line up go this way: goal-oriented, journalism, the Derby favorite, and the favorite for the Preakness. Dan Illman's morning line has him the 8-5 choice. Dwayne Lukas and American Promise. Then we've got Heart of Honor from overseas, Saffie Osborne and his daughter, or Saffie Osborne, the daughter of Jamie Osborne, the trainer. A little father-daughter interaction here in the Preakness with Heart of Honor from the UK. Hey Billy, the local Maryland rep. River Thames for Todd Pletcher. Sandman, the horse who was second wagering choice in the Kentucky Derby, also second wagering choice in Dan's morning line at 4-1. Clever Again and Gosger round out the field of 9. Let's introduce you to some of the newcomers to this year's Preakness. Of course, you know the 3 leftovers from the Kentucky Derby and Journalism, American Promise, and Sandman. Let's talk about some of the newcomers and introduce you to those. Clever Again, a winner of 2 straight in Hot Springs in Arkansas. In fact, he won the Hot Springs Stakes last time out, beating a couple Bafferts. We've seen trainer Steve Asmussen win the Preakness on multiple occasions in the past, and Clever Again, a very interesting new shooter.
Clever Again, he's clearly the one to beat. Looks like Jose Ortiz thinks this horse has plenty of energy for the stretch run as he turns for home, asks him to turn on the afterburners, and he opens up 2.5. Gaming reclaiming second from Perfect Force, but Clever Again, a very exciting prospect in the 3-year-old division in the Winchell Thoroughbred colors. What a great weekend for Jose Ortiz.
Asmussen's won this multiple times. Nobody's won it more than Bob Baffert. His 8 victories, a Preakness record. He's got goal-oriented. Not the horse many thought at the beginning of the season would be Bob Baffert's Preakness rep. In fact, not many people thought 2 weeks ago it would be Bob Baffert's rep. He was not included amongst the 40 individual wagering choices for the Preakness Future Wager. But it's goal-oriented, off an allowance win on Kentucky Derby Day, who moves on to the second jewel in the Triple Crown. Here he was at Churchill Downs.
And swings to the outside. They're off the turn, goal-oriented, heads for home, 2.5 length lead. Hypness continues to rally, is about to be second with a furlong to go. Tiz Secure's rallying too. Goal-oriented's in deep water. Here comes Hypness up into second. Hypness trying to catch goal-oriented. Final 16th, but goal-oriented digs down deep and would not.
That's goal-oriented. As for Todd Pletcher, he's won the Derby. He's won the Belmont. He's never won the Preakness. He rarely shows up at the Preakness. He's here, though, with River Thames and Irad Ortiz. The last time we saw them, they were a decent third in the Bluegrass Stakes.
And now River Thames picks up the chase from third. Render Judgment is fourth. Chancer McPatrick is 6 lengths off the lead in fifth. Burnham Square has to go wide from last. Around Admiral Dennis, they move for the top of the stretch. East Avenue, the lead now down to just 1 length. Owen Almighty is in second position off the turn. River Thames is in third. Burnham Square still has a lot of work to do. Moves out to the center of the racetrack. Coming into the final furlong. Owen Almighty challenging East Avenue. River Thames seeks to join them. Admiral Dennis runs late toward the rail. Burnham Square from the outside. They've got to get East East Avenue. He's got the lead in deep stretch. He leads a length and a half. River Thames is still trying. Burnham Square unleashing a final try down to the wire. Burnham Square gets there.
Burnham Square would end up 6th in the Kentucky Derby. Owen Almighty out of that Bluegrass was 5th in the Run for the Roses. So how might that stack up when we look at the Preakness contenders for River Thames? For Todd Pletcher, again, a rare Pletcher to show up here, especially one who was not the Kentucky Derby winner. Pletcher's only had a couple new shooters running the Preakness over the last 15 years. River Thames will test that. And also amongst the new shooters, there's Heart of Honor. We talked about the father-daughter combination of trainer Jamie Osborne and jockey Safi Osborne. Heart of Honor comes from the UK, has been racing over the winter in Dubai at Meydan in the United Arab Emirates, comes off a second in the UAE Derby. In fact, comes off 3 straight second-place finishes in Meydan in the 2000 Guineas, a Group 3, in the El Bastikia, listed stakes, and then in the Grade 2 UAE Derby behind Admire Daytona. Now, of course, Admire Daytona went on to run in the Kentucky Derby and finished last via Japan. So I'm not sure how that company line stacks up for Heart of Honor. Heart of Honor is experienced over the all-weather and on the dirt overseas. So the conditions at Pimlico on a sloppy track, you see the gallop here. This taking place just, I believe, this morning. This is Heart of Honor on the track Tuesday morning at Pimlico with a very light canter there. Not even, you wouldn't even call that more than a jog, getting out and stretching the legs over the racetrack. So Heart of Honor, one of the other new shooters in this year's Preakness. In fact, we've got 6 of them overall. We'll talk about that in a historical context in just a moment. So a field of 9. We know Journalism almost won the Kentucky Derby from off the pace, got outclosed by Sovereignty. We'll talk more and show you that race in just a bit. We know Sandman comes from far off the pace. So amongst the horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby, it would seem that American Promise would be the fastest of that group. In fact, American Promise is the only horse who was part of the early mix in the Kentucky Derby who's back in the Preakness Stakes. He's the only horse who was top 5 early in the Kentucky Derby who is back here in the Preakness Stakes. Let's look at the potential pace prediction that I have for this year's Preakness in a field of 9. Going to my own 3/16 trip. I've got 2 speed horses in here that I'm pretty certain they want to go to the front. That's Clever Again, the horse we saw from Arkansas, winner of the Hot Spring Stakes last time. And with an outer post, I think he's going to try to break and start clearing over some runners and get over to the rail or worse, the 2 path into the clubhouse turn. American Promise is going to show speed from the 3 path. I would expect him to go the winner of the Virginia Derby for Dwayne Lucas. Lucas won this race on the front end with Seize the Gray. Last year, he won it on the front end with Oxbow. That recipe is tried and true for Dwayne Lucas in the Preakness Stakes. I expect American Promise to definitely go. Could there be more speed than those 2? I think that's possible, but I'm going to put Goal Oriented in the pressing category. You might think with the rail that they're going to try to go to the front with him, and that could be the case. We'll see what jockey Flavian Pratt does, but he's a rather patient rider. They made the lead at Churchill last time, and that was on, a reasonable pace and a half and 47 over the slop. They're going to go a little quicker than that, I think, in this race. So I think Goal Oriented might sit just a length or 2 back. Same with River Thames. Can be up near the pace, but I don't think we'll be right on it. Journalism and trainer Michael McCarthy talked about how they were farther back than they wanted to be in the Kentucky Derby. There was some trouble at the start, bumped at the start, and then shuffled around a little bit down around the inside when bumping with Luxor Cafe through the run through the stretch the first time. Journalism wanted to be a little bit closer to the pace, was 11th, 7 1/4 lengths back, with 6 furlongs left to run after the Preakness or in the Kentucky Derby. I think in the Preakness, they're going to want to stay closer. I don't think they want to be too close to a hot pace, but I think they will be closer to it. As for the horses just in behind then, Pay Billy, the local, Gosger, winner of the Lexington Stakes, and then I think the international runner Heart of Honor came from a little bit off of it before engaging in the UAE Derby. And from what I can gather in the other speed in this race, I don't think Heart of Honor is going to kick early with this group. And of course, Sandman's the one out the back closer in the field. One note about pace in the Preakness: in the last dozen years, the half-mile leader has accounted for 5 victories. Second place finish and 2/3. Back-to-back winners of this race were horses who led after the opening half mile. Seized the Gray last year, National Treasure 2 years ago. Those were Lukas and Baffert. Lukas and Baffert both have horses with some early speed in this race. So like we said, tried and true pace scenarios. Expect the 3 American Promise to definitely show speed. The 1 goal-oriented could be up in that speed category too. And if we get more than 2, I always say more than 2, it's a party, and that means there could be trouble up front in terms of a pace scenario. If we get 3 horses really battling up in the front end of the Preakness Stakes, we could be looking at a meltdown scenario where the speed backs up like it did in the Kentucky Derby, and then the field sort of flips. You remember from Derby Day, Sovereignty was 16th early, Journalism 11th, 12th for Baeza. They ended up 1, 2, 3. Could we see a complete flip like that in the Preakness if they go too fast? Perhaps, but there's not a lot of tried and true closing types in this particular field. But I don't think this race gets won up front like it has been in the last couple years. If it is, Clever again, maybe the most talented of the speed horses. And if this race is to be won on the front end, it would be Clever again. But Journalism should get a nice setup, sitting 4th or 5th, I think. A little bit closer, obviously, in terms of length. I don't think he'll be 8 lengths back like he was on Derby Day. The race setup should be pretty good for him. And I think a deep closer, no problem for a horse like Sandman in terms of the pace setup. I think there will be plenty of pace here if he's good enough. We'll talk about that as we get through our topics here on the show. But in terms of pace, it will be a challenge to win this year's Preakness on the front end. Many of the new shooters will try to be up there along with American Promise coming out of the Kentucky Derby. That's a look at topic number 1, the posts and the pace of this year's Preakness Stakes. Let's go to our second topic on the big board, and it's the big debate, to rest or not to rest. The Kentucky Derby alumni moving on to the Preakness Stakes. Obviously, there's one huge notable absence in this year's Preakness Stakes, that being Kentucky Derby winner Sovereignty. He's reportedly healthy. He's training. He's already arrived at Saratoga towards the Belmont Stakes coming up in a couple weeks' time. So trainer Bill Mott, Godolphin, the connections, thought it was more important to them to wait for the Belmont Stakes and go towards the Travers in the summer to make a run at the American Triple Crown. We can debate the validity of that and the strength of the decision, but we are where we are for now. And in terms of to rest or not to rest, it becomes a discussion with the horses running back on 2 weeks rest in this year's Preakness Stakes. Those being Journalism, those being Sandman, and of course the other one, American Promise. If we look at the history of horses going from the Derby to the Preakness, there is a drop-off. 3 horses this year is about par for what we've seen in recent years, but historically, as we look here, there is a definite drop-off in the number of horses from the Kentucky Derby coming back to run in the Preakness. Now, is it a massive drop-off off a cliff? Not necessarily. Here's the stat I did for my years working with NBC Sports as a researcher on the Triple Crown telecast for 18 seasons. 1970s, there was an average of 4.9 horses from the Derby coming to run in the Preakness. That bumped up to 5.3, peaked in the 1990s at 5.7. We saw in the 2000s it start to slide, 2010s continued to slide, and we're on a similar kind of slide down, another 0.7 starters per race in this decade of the 2020s. The number is getting lower, but it's not drastically different. We never had a situation in American racing where there were 8, 10, 12 horses every year of the 20 out of the Derby coming back to run in the Preakness Stakes. That's never been the case. But 5 is about a norm over the course of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and in through the 2000s. Now we're into the 4 and 3 range, so there's definitely a drop-off here, but it's the big horses who we miss that really make that kind of standout statement. Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner this year, opting not to run. In 2022, Rich Strike opted not to run his connections after the big 80-1 upset in the Kentucky Derby. 2019, Country House was sick and did not run in the Preakness Stakes. That was the first Derby winner to miss the Preakness since Spend a Buck in 1985. Spend a Buck had a bonus to go run in the Jersey Derby at Garden State Park. His connections opted to go for the money instead of running in the second leg of the Triple Crown. Spend a Buck, of course, one of the fastest Kentucky Derby winners of all time, but he did not move on to the Preakness. Really, he is the prototype of some of what we're seeing now, but he didn't run because of the money, and he didn't take time off and train up to a particular race. He simply skipped the Preakness based on money. Really, the only horse to skip the Preakness, move on to the Belmont Stakes in the quote-unquote old days was Gato del Sol in 1982 for Eddie Gregson. He was a horse who ran in the Derby, won the Derby, skipped the Preakness, then came on to run in the Belmont Stakes. He was never a top-notch horse, really, after his Derby victory, but he was a good 3-year-old. But Gato del Sol kind of is a little bit of the pattern of what we see now. There's obviously no correlation between what they did then in 1982 to what we saw in Rich Strike and Sovereignty. So the last couple years, Kentucky Derby winners opting to skip while healthy is a disconcerting decision to me. The Preakness Stakes so important, to start or not to start, to rest or not to rest. Look, I understand the tactical advantage of going to the Preakness Stakes, or skipping the Preakness Stakes and going to the Belmont with 5 weeks advantage. The horses who run in all 3 legs of the Triple Crown can be tired, worn down a little bit by the time they get to the Belmont. But with fewer and fewer horses going to the Preakness in between, there are less horses to worry about with that worn down situation when we get to the Belmont Stakes. If you've got a horse who's healthy and has won the Kentucky Derby, I expect to see your butt in the gate for the Preakness Stakes. I just think that's the right thing to do. There's no historical connotation to show anything suggesting that horses running in the Derby and the Preakness have shorter careers, have more physical issues. In fact, to the contrary, some of those runners have been some of the best we've seen in American racing over the last several decades. So when we look at the should you rest or not rest going into the Preakness Stakes, well, I think it's just fine to wheel back on the 2 weeks rest. Now, we have had a situation in recent years where horses coming off the layoff, or more of the layoff, the new shooters, if you will, the horses who have skipped the Derby have won the Preakness the last 5 years. Some of that situational by who the Derby winners were as big upsetters. Some of that situational by a couple of the Derby winners avoiding the Preakness Stakes. A couple of those situations, we had the DQ of Medina Spirit, and Mandaloon became the official Kentucky Derby winner. So there's a lot of reasons why the last 5 winners of the Preakness have been new shooters. But part of that is certainly the propensity of trainers to want a little bit more time in between their races. So as you're handicapping the Preakness this year, I would not give a major disadvantage to the horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby, and I would not give any kind of major edge to the horses who are looking at this as a fresh situation and trying to kind of jump in midway into the Triple Crown sequence. I think this year's Derby alumni are solid runners, especially at the top in journalism, and I wouldn't expect the 2-week turnaround to be a big deal when handicapping this year's Preakness Stakes. But again, when the historical history goes back and looks at this period, one thing we'll know, we're certainly in a decline in the number of horses running in the Preakness Stakes coming out of the Kentucky Derby. But as I bring that chart back up, notice we've ticked down before, and we've ticked up before and then ticked down. So these trends can change over history, right? In the 1970s, we were closer to where we were now, and then it picked up in the 80s and into the 90s. So while it's in a downturn now, it may pick back up even with the same spacing as we move forward into the future. Certainly, there are some medication reasons, post-race treatments for horses, HISA and the testing that goes on now that's different than it was several years back. So it is more difficult for some of these trainers and their training methods to get a horse to recover with things like joint injections, with NSAIDs that the horses are treated with for inflammation and for general recovery. Those kind of things can't be involved for a horse turning back in 2 weeks and have to flush through the system and things like that. You can't run with those kind of treatments. You're certainly legal to use them as therapeutics after a race, but the recovery time needed then for that system to clear, those horses can't necessarily run back in 2 weeks' time. So it's sort of the horses who come out of the Derby and don't need a lot of help. Those horses are able to run back into the Preakness, and that's one of the major considerations of racing in 2025 the way it is. To rest or not to rest, our second topic this week on It's Official. Let's go to our third topic this week. Journalism. Is he as good as advertised? Journalism, of course, the favorite for the Kentucky Derby, but he lacked the response we wanted to see in the stretch. Of course, Sovereignty ran up to his outside. It was the first time any horse had been to his outside in a race. Let's take a look at the Kentucky Derby replay and talk about journalism and see where he might be as the big favorite for the Preakness.
Berto Rispoli, and he's picking off horses one by one on the far outside. Neo Equos is the leader at the top of the stretch. Journalism is on the move as they turn for home, and Sovereignty is coming with him on the outside. The two of them go right by with a furlong to run. Journalism and Sovereignty, nose to nose, down to the last 16th of a mile. Sovereignty has taken the lead. Journalism is second toward the inside. Baeza is third, but it will be Sovereignty to rule the Kentucky Derby. Journalism.
Now, you look at the finish there and you wonder, a horse who had rattled off 4 straight wins, if Journalism might be on the south side of his best form. He was absolutely incredible in the San Felipe Stakes. He took a minor step back, even in victory, in a tough, hard-fought victory in the Santa Anita Derby, and then defeated for the first time around 2 turns when Sovereignty ran by him. Maybe Sovereignty was just the better horse on that day, and that's what fans of Journalism are hoping. Maybe it was the muddy track. Now, we've got a forecast for rain and thunderstorms this week in Baltimore. Could be a muddy track again when we get to Saturday for the Preakness Stakes. We'll see what Mother Nature has in store for us. Maybe the mud was the reason why Sovereignty didn't run his absolute best. But when you look at the rest of the field in there, you're talking about a horse who ran second in a 19-horse Kentucky Derby. So are we really raining on a parade, or did he run his race and just happen to get beat by a better horse that day? The margin wasn't much different. He was a neck in front of Baeza in there. He was 3/4 of a length in front of Baeza when winning the Santa Anita Derby. So the margin shrunk by a half length. So if Baeza ran his race and got a half length closer to Journalism, was Journalism coming back a little bit to Baeza? Is Baeza improving at a faster rate? Is Journalism, regressing a little bit? These are some of the questions, and I try to put it in numbers because I got to be honest, when I thought Journalism stuck his head in front at the top of the lane and the speed horses were starting to come back, I didn't think there'd be any way in the world he would have lost that race. No way in the world. And that's not to knock Sovereignty in any stretch, but look at the late brisk pace figures that Journalism had put up. Now, Bristnet has late pace figures as part of their past performances, and I like these numbers because they kind of show how good a horse finishes on the back end of their races, what they have left in the tank. Look at the 4 route wins for Journalism from top to bottom. Back in November, broke his maiden at a mile, 8 furlongs, and got a 101, a really big number for a maiden in a 2-turn race. Then in the Los Alfuturity, 104 with that long stretch at Los Alamitos, really impressive in running away from a couple Bob Baffert horses down the stretch. Then the crack in the San Felipe, when he ran down Barnes and did it like he was tied to the 8th pole, 113, a massive brisk late pace figure. He needed every inch of the stretch to run by Baeza after being hemmed in by Barnes and company in the Santa Anita Derby, and he was able to produce a 109, another massive late brisk pace figure. I mean, these are among the very top of his generation, and he's run multiple times in these 4-digit numbers. Then in the Kentucky Derby, look at the drop-off. Just an 88 brisk late pace figure. Now, maybe there are reasons for that. The 1.25 mile distance, right? A lot of horses are tired at the end of a 1.25 mile. So maybe he couldn't put up as big a brisk number at the 1.25 mile. Maybe being 8 lengths off the lead when they were going very fast in the Kentucky Derby actually took something out of him as well. 8 lengths sounds like a long way, but when you're talking about Derby splits in 46-1, 110-3 for the first 6 furlongs, being a little bit, towards the front of not the front of the pack, but at least mid-pack, might have taken a little bit of starch out of him late and why you only ran that 88. It could have been the mud. Maybe he just didn't get into the mud as well, and the mud was tiring for him more than the fast dirt tracks were in Southern California. Remember, the Californians don't train on muddy tracks and really get no experience over it. So maybe there are some reasons why he only ran an 88 late brisk pace figure. But Journalism did start the show. Maybe there's a little wear on the tires. So if you're trying to beat him in this year's Preakness Stakes at what's going to be an even shorter price than he was in the Kentucky Derby, without Sovereignty there, with the smaller field size, naturally people are going to gravitate to him. He's 8-5 in the morning line. I could see him go as low as maybe even money or 6-5 in the Preakness Stakes. Maybe there's a little wear showing with Journalism right now, and it's something that we have to consider. Let's go to our 4th topic this week on It's Official. And if you're not going to take Journalism at a short price, the Sandman have the will to come back from the Kentucky Derby to the Preakness and score the victory. Sandman's a horse for trainer Mark Cassie, who going into the Kentucky Derby was dealing with some foot problems. We saw recently, it came out in the racing press, where Sandman was had glue-on shoes because they couldn't do the typical nail-on shoes because of some foot issues leading up to the Kentucky Derby. He had his final Derby workout 13 days before the race, which is very far out. I questioned that at the time of why is Mark Casse putting this one away 13 days before the race. The official word from the stable was he was ready to go and he didn't need to do anymore. But that was kind of atypical training pattern and maybe one of the first red flags. Now, Sandman came back and ran a good race in the Kentucky Derby. By his standards, I think it was a good race for him in running 7th. He more than split the field. He was almost in the first third of the field there. He's a horse who wants to come from off the pace. He needs the pace to kind of come back to him. And he needs history to come back to him because does Sandman have the will? It's not about his intestinal fortitude. It's play on words. War of Will, his predecessor in the Mark Casse stable in 2019, has the exact same resume as Sandman right before War of Will rebounded to win the 2019 Preakness Stakes. Both horses had 9 career starts going into the Preakness. Both had 3 wins. Sandman has 1 stakes win in the Arkansas Derby. War of Will had 2, both coming off 7th place finishes with plenty of excuses in the Kentucky Derby. War of Will, of course, interfered with by the horse who was disqualified from the win for interference in Maximum Security. He was cut off on the far turn. War of Will bounced back to win the Preakness Stakes. Sandman will try to follow suit and do the same for trainer Mark Casse. Now, Sandman's going to get a new jockey for the Preakness Stakes. It was announced yesterday Sandman's rider at the draw was going to be none other than John Velazquez, Hall of Fame rider and one of the all-time greats in the game. The reason he's getting a new rider is because Jose Ortiz, the rider of Sandman in the Kentucky Derby and his regular pilot, he was already committed to ride. He gave the commitment that he was going to ride in the Preakness Stakes aboard the Steve Asmussen runner Clever Again. So he rode Clever Again and Sandman to wins in back-to-back days back when Clever Again won the Hot Spring Stakes the day after the Arkansas Derby. It was that huge weekend for Ortiz at Oaklawn Park, but he was already committed to ride here. They weren't going to run Sandman. The change of tactics and strategy with Sandman kind of coming into the field at the 11th hour to run in the Preakness Stakes put Ortiz kind of in a situation. Would he honor his commitment to the Asmussen runner Clever Again, or would he go back and ride Sandman and kind of spin the connections of Clever Again? He opted to ride Clever Again. I would not read too much into it in terms of, that Ortiz chose to ride Clever Again over Sandman. I think this is more of a timing issue in that if Sandman had said right away, the connections of Sandman right away said we're headed towards the Preakness Stakes, then you would look at a situation where Ortiz maybe had a decision to make. But the fact that Sandman wasn't being pointed toward the Preakness originally, Ortiz wants to lock down a mount. He has a good horse, a horse he just won a major stakes with, a horse who could be second or third wagering choice and Clever Again in the Preakness. He's going to honor that commitment, and he's going to ride that horse for Asmussen. So I would not look too much into that. But can Sandman rebound and win the Preakness Stakes? That's the question. Can he follow War of Will from 5 years ago in 2019? He's going to have to get stronger on the back end of his races. We talk about those brisk late pace figures for Sovereignty being in the hundreds, but when you look at Sandman, he just hasn't hit like that. 74 in the Derby, 88 in the Arkansas Derby, 95 in the Rebel, 94 in the Southwest. Against good horses, he's just never put up a triple-digit late brisk pace figure. That is going to be my undoing today trying to say that. But Sandman just hasn't closed as strong on the clock and on the numbers as it might look visually. A lot of his races have been extremely fast early and then fell apart and were really slow late, and the fields just kind of flipped. Remember those races in Arkansas where the Baffert horses ran off with tremendous speed earlier in those races? They were 30 lengths faster the first half of those races than they were the second half of the races. The Arkansas Derby and the Rebel both shaped up almost exactly the same way. So the horses who kind of rallied and closed from behind in those races in Arkansas really weren't running that fast on the back end compared to some other races. So Sandman's got to prove he can really finish. But as we talked about in the potential pace scenario, go back to that graphic here as we look at the pace scenario from earlier in the show, Sandman's going to be at the back of the pack, and he wants some of those horses in that press category, the 1 goal-oriented, the 6 River Thames, the 2 journalism. He wants at least 1, 2, maybe all 3 of those to get up into that speed category, get up there and challenge Clever Again, challenge American Promise. If there are 4 or 5 of them ding-donging on the front end, then Sandman might get the same kind of race shape that he got in Arkansas. And closing with a 90 brisk late pace figure might be good enough to win if the race completely falls apart. That's the hope if you like Sandman. But I don't think on true ability that he can just pick it up and lay it down with 100, 105 brisk late pace figure and beat a horse like Journalism if they both fire on the back end of their races. Now, if Journalism is sliding like we've talked about in topic number 3, and we've got here in topic number 4, can Sandman, pull out the will to win this thing in the end? If one's going the wrong direction and the race flips in favor of the deep closer, maybe Sandman can lop into a victory here in the Preakness Stakes. It's not without merit. He's not a horse I liked at all in the Kentucky Derby. Honestly, him finishing 7th in the Derby was a little bit better than I thought he would run. Even though he was the second wagering choice, I was pretty icy on Sandman in there. Now in the Preakness, I think with the pace scenario and the way things shake out, you have to consider him as potentially part of the mix. And we go back to that Mark Casse War of Will 2019 and all the karma that's going back to their similarities. That's topic number 4. Sandman, does he have the will to win the Preakness Stakes? I'd say he might. Let's go now to our 5th topic this week on the It's Official podcast. 5th and final topic. Lukas and Baffert have lorded over Baltimore in the last 40 years or so. Talked about the head of the program in 1980 when Codex won the Preakness Stakes under Angel Cordero, one of my youngest memories of the Preakness Stakes as a kid. Trained that day by D. Wayne Lukas. It was the first Triple Crown race win for D. Wayne Lukas. He was a slick-talking city slicker amongst the cowboys and the debutantes. And back then, he ruffled a lot of feathers. And here he is, almost at the age of 90, still going. And when you talk about Lukas and you talk about Baffert, they're kind of cut from the same mold. 2 guys, with the sunglasses and the suits and the loose lips and, great interviews over the years and certainly part of their own share of controversies over the decades. But the one thing that's undisputable about Lukas and Baffert as they come back to the Preakness this year is how dominant they've been. They have won 15 Preakness Stakes between the 2 of them. This is Preakness number 150. You don't have to be a great mathematician to figure out they've won about 10% of the Preaknesses that have ever been run. And the Preakness, of course, began when Ulysses S. Grant was in the White House. So you look at this graphic. I know putting up 45 years on a graphic isn't really great viewing, but look at the victories as they spread out through the years from Lukas and Baffert. From back to 1980, the big run in the 90s where the 2 of them won 5 of 6 combined. Baffert had the run in the early 2000s before he went radio silent for about 8 years in the Triple Crown. Then Baffert and Lukas back at it in the 2010s. And the last 2 years, again, Baffert 2 years ago won it with National Treasure. Lukas last year was Seize the Gray. Neither one of those superstar horses, neither one of those horses who ran in the Kentucky Derby. When we talk about their contenders this year, Baffert and Lukas, they've got a pair. Baffert starts from the inside with Goal Oriented under Flavian Pratt. He'll be making his first stakes bid. This is just a 3rd career start for Goal Oriented. And again, his first try in a stakes race. As for American Promise, he'll be one of the other speed horses in here from post number 3. It could be Baffert and Lukas on the engine. I expect Clever Again to go to the front, but if Clever Again doesn't break for some reason, we could see Baffert and Lukas setting the tempo in the Preakness Stakes as they try to get Sweet 16 between the 2 of them. As for Lucas's horse, American Promise, of course, earlier this year, he won the Virginia Derby. In the Kentucky Derby, it didn't go as well for American Promise. He finished 16th in there after pressing the pace. He was 3rd after 3/4 of a mile, and then throughout the breaks, if you will, ended up 16th in the Kentucky Derby, beaten about 38 lengths. Now, there is some precedence for horses coming back off of such defeats in the Kentucky Derby. Louis Quatorze back in 1996 for another Hall of Famer, Nick Zito, also finished 16th in the Kentucky Derby. He rebounded to win the Preakness, and how did he do it? He went right to the front, basically, and went wire to wire under Pat Day back in '96. So Lukas looking for a rebound, similar to what Louis Quatorze did for Zito back in the day. But Baffert, Lukas, back in the Preakness, looking for their 16th victory between the two of them. Again, Baffert has the all-time record with 8 wins in the Preakness Stakes. Lukas has 7. Of course, if Lukas wins, he'll tie Baffert atop the all-time leading leaderboard in the history of the Preakness Stakes. You can't talk Preakness Stakes without Lukas and Baffert over the last 45 years, and you certainly can't talk about Saturday's race without discussion of them as well. Let's review our topics this week on the It's Official podcast. Our Preakness posts and pace could set up to be a very fast pace in our estimation. To rest or not to rest, we don't have sovereignty, and we don't have quite as many horses in the Preakness Stakes as we did decades past. But again, there was never a situation when we were looking at huge amounts of horses from the Derby to the Preakness. We just need about 1 or 2 more to make the right decision and get back into the Preakness mix here in future seasons. Journalism, is he as good as advertised? His Kentucky Derby second place finish, certainly nothing to sneeze at. But his 88 brisk late pace figure, can we find the reason for that? Is it his form declining? Was it the situation with the track? Was it the distance? Was it the pace of the Kentucky Derby? We'll see. We'll get the answer in the final 1/8 of a mile of the Preakness Stakes. Does Sandman have the will to repeat in 2019 what War of Will did, rebounding to win the Preakness Stakes for trainer Mark Casse? He'll get the right pace set up to do so. And Lukas and Baffert, lords over Baltimore over the past 45 years with 15 of those wins. Those 5 topics are now official because Jeff Siegel and I said so. That's the way we play the game. I'm looking forward to having my longtime partner, Jeff Siegel, back on the podcast soon. Wish everyone out there would send along your thoughts and prayers for Jeff Siegel as he recovers from some health issues. We look forward to having him back very soon. Hope Jeff is able to enjoy the Preakness Stakes this weekend, watching from home and checking out this year's Preakness, middle jewel of the Triple Crown. Get well, buddy. On behalf of everybody with First Bet and Express Bet, I'm Jeremy Plonk. Enjoy Preakness number 150. I'll be back on Thursday with handicapper Scott Shapiro as we handicap 8 stakes races on the Preakness and Black-Eyed Susan Day cards, including the big one. We'll give you our final picks then for the Preakness Stakes. Have a great day, everybody.